Hey guys. So I've been seeing a topic on my YouTube a lot, and I figured I'd sort of give my 2 cents on the whole matter, and also bring my perspective into it as someone who does this full time here in Germany. Um, and I'm sure anyone who's been watching the automotive space on YouTube will have seen for years now a bunch of videos about the technician or auto mechanic shortage. Um, and I've been hearing a lot of opinions on why this is happening and what the reasons behind that are. And I just figured I wanted to share my perspective on it. So, why is no one doing this job anymore? Or I suppose a better question is, why are people leaving this industry? Um, it's been a couple of years coming. So, just some background to what my place in the industry is. I've been doing this more or less professionally for 4.5, almost 5 years now. Um, and in that time, I've seen a lot of the points that people bring up in these videos, and I can really strongly relate to a lot of them. And really, the only reason that I'm still in the industry is because it's kind of all that I know how to do, and it's the only thing that I'm this good at this level, and it's the only thing that I just genuinely enjoy and imagine myself doing as a day job, at least at the moment. But I can definitely see why people are getting out of this. And I think the number one reason for especially a lot of our colleagues in the US is definitely pay. Um, if I think about what it was like coming up in this industry and learning how to fix and how to diagnose and how to maintain and repair cars the way that they are nowadays. And I had the privilege of being an apprentice at a German manufacturer's dealership, which means that I actually came up on a lot of the newest and latest stuff. But I also on occasion got to see some of the older stuff. And I really, when I think back to that time, the amount of complication and the amount of safety and emissions and comfort systems that have been put onto cars nowadays, and it's not just the German automobiles. We're starting to see Toyotas and Hyundais come standard equipped with stuff like adaptive cruise control and parking assists and extensive safety systems. And I'm sure that all of that has its place in the automotive industry, but that's the reason why a lot of us are getting out of it when it comes to pay. Because for the amount of knowledge that you need to work on cars and fix cars nowadays, and the amount of skill that you need to actually not just understand the systems, but also be able to diagnose, take them apart, or even just get to them and replace stuff when stuff needs replacing. When you take both of those factors into consideration, most of us don't get paid enough for what it is that we do. We're not just grease monkeys or mechanics from 20, 25 years ago, although that's not really valid either, because 25 years ago is at this point like the early 2000s when a lot of this stuff started coming out. But it's just not the same anymore. And honestly, employers have not caught up to that. They've not caught up to the fact that, at least in every dealership I've worked in or seen or heard of, it's not the sales department up front that makes money. It's not even, I guess the manufacturer that sells the customer their vehicles that's making the shop or the establishment money. It's the shop. It's guys like me and the shop foreman and the service advisors and the service writers who are out there fixing and maintaining the vehicles that are already out on the road that actually turn a profit and keep the dealership alive. And I guess that this video is going to be a little bit more focused on that dealership scenario, because that's all that I know. I've only ever worked in dealerships, so I've no idea how it is for independent shops. And so, like I said, at most dealerships that I've sort of heard of, or the two dealerships that I've been at, um, it's a shop that makes the dealership money. And at the same time, it's usually the guys in the shop who are making, I don't want to say the least amount of money, at the dealership, but they're definitely not up there. And it's definitely not the guys at the tools turning wrenches and working with the diag tools and actually hands on that are making any sort of noticeable money. I mean, for most mechanics or technicians that I know here in Germany, we don't drive the nicest cars. And, one could argue that the reason for that is that since we have to fix all the newest, latest, greatest stuff, we don't really want to be doing that in our spare time. That's why we drive older, beat up vehicles. And there's some truth to that. But a big part of that is also that we can't afford to drive the cars that we fix every day. And I don't know. I don't want to say that I feel like technicians should be able to go on holiday 3 times a year, or they should, after 10 years be millionaires. But, I think a lot of us just want to get paired or paid a fair wage for the skills that we have. I mean, if I think about what my role is right now at the dealership that I work at, I'm honestly, even though I'm fairly new to the manufacturer and fairly new at the shop, I'm basically already on the heavy line. I do a lot of heavy diagnostics, which has recently involved, taking apart basically the entire interior on a relatively new car, and within the lab scope, start measuring CAN bus networks and flex ray networks, and just really going deep into the diag stuff. And then like a week later, I was taking an engine out of a car and overhauling stuff or replacing stuff. And it's every week is like that for me. I basically hop between the diag stuff, warranty work, and the heavy line stuff, which involves engines, transmissions, and basically anything that involves taking out major components from the vehicle and fixing it and then putting it back. But honestly, the guys who are in that situation like I am, who do the heavy line and diagnostic and warranty work, we're the ones who are getting punished financially. Because I mean, I'm thankful that I don't work flat rate, which is what most of my American counterparts work or get paid by. But the way that I get paid is I get a salary plus commission, and my commission is not even based on my own performance, at least at the shop that I'm at right now. It's based on the performance of my team. And it just so happens that in my team, it's me, another heavy line guy, and a diag and warranty guy. So for us to, and here's the thing, there's like a minimum threshold that we need to sell on hours and on labor time to make that commission. And then there's also a ceiling. So, on the months where it's really bad, we don't make that threshold, so we don't get our commission on top of our salary. But on the months that are really good, where all three of us are on fire and we're just selling labor time and selling work, we don't get more for doing all of that stuff, because it's limited at a certain point. And that's just the way that the pay scale works at my shop. I don't want to say that I'm underpaid, because I'm definitely not, but I'm not making that kind of money that I would say is fair for the skill set that I have, for the amount of work that I do, and especially considering the fact that, especially at the dealership level, if we look at sort of the horizontal comparable roles at the dealership as far as qualification goes, um, I'm the only one who has to show up with not just a an education in the trade, but I need experience. I need to know how to use the tools. Even though tools are provided here in Germany, I still need to bring my own tools, because you're not always given the nicest stuff. And sometimes the stuff that you're given is like the bare minimum and the basics. And if you want to turn those hours, anyone who wrenches professionally knows, you want to start turning hours at a really efficient rate, you're going to need specialty tools. And the shop that I work at is actually really willing and ready to pay for stuff like that. But especially in the United States, if you're buying all of your tools by yourself, you're now in this really weird situation where you're not getting paid well. But to do your job better so that you can get paid more, you start having to buy more tools. And it sucks. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why guys are getting out of this. It's because for the level of skill and efficiency and knowledge and craftsmanship that you need to do this job effectively, we're just not paid enough. So, to make that even worse, what a lot of technicians deal with is honestly just a lack of appreciation. You know, as I just stated, we're the only guys in the shop or in the whole dealership that need to come up to work every day with the knowledge and skill set that we have. And for the most part, most mechanics and technicians that I know are all honest and hardworking people that really just want to do the job right. Okay. And so we have to learn to survive in that environment, and we try to do the job as best as we can while still staying efficient enough to make enough money. But here's where that appreciation side of things comes into play. Let's say over the course of 2 or 3 months, I push a volume of, let's just to keep the numbers easy, I'll push out a volume of 100 cars, right? Um, I could do 99 of those cars without a single mistake, no comebacks, nothing goes wrong, everything is great. You know, the dealership made a ton of money on those 99 cars, given that none of them are warranty work. Um, but if I have one mistake, one comeback, or one thing doesn't go right, you know, let's just say for some reason I end up breaking an engine, or you know, I end up breaking a pretty expensive component on a car, or whatever it is. You know, it's gonna happen. You know, when you start working with stuff, things are gonna happen. It is what it is, right? But that one thing is gonna be held over your head for at least like the next year. You know, at the very latest, the next time it comes for your performance review, if you even have that at your dealership, that usually happens like once a year, you know, that's going to be held in front of you like, hey, so you know, this year was really great except for those like 1 or 2 cars where it wasn't so great, or you know, you had 3 comebacks this year. And then if ever you are honestly dumb enough to try and defend yourself and say, well, yeah, so I had 3 comebacks this year, but I also pushed out, according to your system, I pushed out like 600 cars. And so 3 comebacks is like nothing in comparison to that, which 600 cars a year isn't that crazy, you know, because like, let's say that just on average, you're working here in Germany, I don't know, like 200 days a year. It's probably more, but I'm just going to use that number. And you pump out like on average 3 cars a day, you're easily in the 600 cars a year range, like without even trying that hard. Um, but if you have 2 or 3 comebacks a year, which is honestly, it's gonna happen. Like all of us are just humans, you know. But that's gonna be held over your head. And whenever the work is done correctly and nice, no one comes in and says, "Hey, man, good job." But the second a car comes back, or something breaks, or something expensive has to be replaced by the shop, or whatever it is, all of a sudden you're the dumbest guy in the dealership. All of a sudden you don't know how to do your job, you're not serious about your job, all of this stuff gets thrown at you, and it's just not right. And I think, you know, here's the thing. What I see in the technicians that leave this industry is that they don't leave the tools entirely most of the time. They'll go into different spaces of this industry or into different spaces of other industries. You know, a lot of guys will go and become plumbers or electricians. Where I live here, a lot of guys go into industry. They start working at factories. They start, you know, actually building the cars that later get fixed by the people who used to have their, or the, you know, by technicians that they formerly are. And so that just goes to show that we like working with our hands. We like doing this stuff, but in those sectors, you know, if something happens, it's accepted, you know, and for some reason in our space it isn't. And I think when you combine that with the honestly low pay, you know, why should you spend your time day in and day out doing something that you, sure, you might enjoy it and you might be really good at it, but then why should you do that for under what you're actually valued at or worth, and then on top of it not even get any appreciation for doing what you're doing? And that circles back into the whole honest and hardworking ethos that a lot of us technicians have. If you're at the dealership and you're doing everything as per service information and the repair manual, you're not going to be clocking a lot of hours, but at least you won't have comebacks, right? But that doesn't save you from the non-appreciative side of this either, because you might not have any comebacks, you might not be making any mistakes, but in your annual performance review, they're going to say you're too slow, you're not pushing enough volume. So I feel like a lot of techs, they get into this position where they feel like they can't win, and so instead of playing a game that they can't win, they're just going to get out. And honestly, I don't blame them for it. I've at my previous job, I had a very serious conversation with my superior about two comebacks that I had within a week, and it was all the same issue. It was EGR coolers. I'm not going to say which manufacturer this is because I don't want any kind of legal issues here, but there is a German manufacturer where there's a recall on the EGR coolers, or there was at least. I think the recall is actually finished now. And what that means is that in a week, I might have done, 10 or 15 EGR coolers. And I had just been pumping out EGR cooler after EGR cooler. And, I had two come back because the manifold bolts weren't actually tightened up. Well, what was the reason behind that? So even though from the labor time it was actually pretty nice to do EGR coolers, there was still this expectation that you had to beat the clock doing it. Because if you actually took as much time as the labor time stated, your dispatcher would usually come by like half an hour before time was up, essentially, and be like, hey man, what's the problem? Why is this taking so long? And then, this is what I told my superior. I was like, dude, you're wondering why mistakes like this happen, like why those two manifold bolts weren't tightened up, and because of that, there was an exhaust smell in the car. It's because we're having to do this monotonous, repetitive work, which is usually a sign for mistakes won't happen because you do it all the time, but you're doing it under time pressure. And again, I told him, look, what about at this point, 60 other EGR coolers that I did where nothing happened, where everything went just as planned, and now you're basically riding my ass about two that came back? And then, this whole spiel started out with, oh, now the customers are going to tell their friends not to come here because we don't know how to do our job. And I'm just like, dude, if that's really how sensitive the reputation of this shop is, that two comebacks make the difference between us making money or not, I'm going to call bullshit on that, because every single year these mistakes happen, and yet at that previous shop, every single year we made more money that year than we did last year. Again, that just goes to show that, we get chewed out for the dumbest shit as technicians, but whenever you're doing your job right, no one really cares. So I think the last point that I want to make in this video, because I could probably go on for hours about this, and I'm sure that I'll make more parts to this video as things come to mind for me, but I think another one of the really big things is the manufacturers. The auto manufacturers themselves, and specifically their labor times, and also let's just call it how it is, the bullshit that they're coming up with that makes it somehow miraculously past the design phase and into the engineering phase and then into production phase and out on the cars. So let's talk about labor times. At my previous job, the manufacturer stated that an oil change pays 6 labor units of labor. Now, here in Germany, we don't calculate with hours the way that, at least from what I've heard, you in the States do. But at that previous shop, 12 labor units were 1 hour. So basically, one labor unit is 5 minutes of work. Okay, so 6 labor units for an oil change is half an hour. That sounds in practice like that makes sense, except it doesn't. Because here's what that 6 labor units, or that 30 minutes of labor time, actually involves. That includes, from the moment that you get that ticket or that job order, it includes going to the computer. And at that previous job, we had the luxury of being able to actually look into like the parts list that had been ordered for that car, and basically clicking on all the parts that you need and then basically sending it to your workspace. So we didn't even have to go to the parts department, but that wasn't always a good thing, because sometimes you were kind of at the mercy of the guys in the parts department, and if they just decided that they all went on lunch break half an hour early, well, you're not getting your parts. But so that's what it includes. It includes getting parts. It includes finding the car on the lot. The shop that I used to work at, the shop where I'm at now is much better because our lot is much smaller, so it's easier to find the car. But the shop that I previously worked at, I don't know the exact number, but I think like 300 cars fit on the parking spot. And to anyone who's out there thinking, well, like, well, yeah, but my service advisor, like just writes on the ticket where the car is parked. That works like 70% of the time. Sometimes, they say that the car is parked at B4, the parking space B4, and you walk up to B4 and it's not only a completely different car, but it's definitely not the car that you need. And so you start looking, so you start searching. Let's say it takes you 5 minutes. Well, okay, that's one labor unit that you just wasted searching for the car. Then you got to bring the car into the shop. You got to put it on the lift. You got to set it up, set up the lift. And, an oil change isn't just drain the oil, put the plug back in, change the filter, put in the new oil. Used to be like that. You still can do it that way, but I'll guarantee you will have comebacks doing that. Why? At least here in Germany, this is how it works. For any reasonably modern car, there is an emissions protection system engaged in the vehicle that gives the driver an alert if the oil level is too high in the car. Okay, so how do you avoid that? Because obviously, especially with modern cars, and this is where the bullshit of the modern manufacturers come in, there's not really a dipstick for you to like actually check the oil level once you change it, right? And so they tell you how much oil goes in for an oil change, but you don't know how much came out. So if you put in exactly what they tell you to put in, but there's still like half a liter left lingering in the engine because, again, you're on the clock, so you close up that drain plug too quickly, well, now you're half a liter overfilled. That's not going to harm the engine. As a matter of fact, on most German cars that like to leak oil, that's probably a good idea. But the thing is, most modern emissions protection systems will actually warn the driver that the engine has been overfilled according to the electronic dipstick, which is complete bullshit. But the reason for that is because they don't want the car via the PCV system or via whatever burning oil and then putting those oil deposits into the catalytic converter, or even worse, putting it out into the environment. So not only do you have to now waste time getting parts, finding the car, getting the car on the hoist, and I guarantee you, I don't care how fast you are, that whole process takes 10 to 15 minutes. So now you have 15 minutes to change the oil. Okay, fine. So if you want to get a lot of the oil out, the car has to be at operating temperature. So how do you do that on a car that's been sat on the lot overnight? That car is completely cold. You're not going to get all the oil out of it, right? So you pull it in, and if you even halfway give a damn about your job, you're going to at least let the engine run for 5 or 10 minutes. You're already out of time. It doesn't add up. And then you have stuff like, oil filters placed in locations that are so asinine that getting to them and just replacing a filter, it's just by itself takes like 5 to 10 minutes. So how much time do you now have left to drain all the oil out of the car? None. And so on every oil change, and this is just the example using an oil change, this is at the previous manufacturer that I worked for, brake fluid flushes on the newer models that had electronic brake boosters. Towards the end, they actually adjusted the labor times because so many people complained, but they gave you like 20 minutes, even though you had to go in with the manufacturer-specific diagnostic tool and tell the car via the computer, I'd like to bleed the brakes, please. And that entire process took you close to an hour, but it only paid you 20 minutes. How are you supposed to win at this game? Because it used to be that you could ride the gravy train and just do maintenance and service work and avoid the heavy line stuff. Don't do engines, don't do transmissions, don't do diag, just do fluids, filters, brakes, and wheels all day, and you'd make money. It's not true anymore, and so there's no way for you to escape out of that. The manufacturers give you labor times that just don't make sense because you can't run towards anything. You do warranty work, you're definitely screwed because the manufacturers somehow. I'll give you an example. I had to program a car today for a known it's not a recall, it's just sort of like service information where they were like, hey, so if this symptom is in the car and the customer claims that it bothers them, this is how you fix it. You basically program the car. And the way that I had to do that, according to service information, was get a USB stick, download the software that you need from the manufacturer's network onto your diagnostic tablet, take the data from that tablet, put it on the USB stick, and then put it from the USB stick into the car, and the car will then pull it into the head unit. The manufacturer pays you half an hour to do that. Just to download the software from the manufacturer's server took me 50 minutes. And we're not even halfway through yet. So, that's the thing. These cars are just getting way too complicated. The labor times are unrealistic. And since we are paid by our labor times, even if it's indirect, even if you're a 100% salary guy, if your productivity is not correct, you're not going to earn more next year because you have no reason, or your boss has no reason to pay you more because your productivity is not good. So that's it. I think that's where I'm going to cut it today because I'm getting a bit riled up. You know, I suppose to close things off, I just want to say, I actually genuinely love this job. I like doing this, and even though there are a lot of downsides to it, I still enjoy turning the wrenches, and I do it more because I like it, and I'm paid a comfortable wage. I think that's true for a lot of us. A lot of us are just comfortable, but we're not really getting what we're supposed to be getting, whether that's money or appreciation, respect, or even just the consideration from the manufacturers that we honestly give our lives to. I mean, how many of you guys know technicians, and it doesn't even have to be like a premium brand. I know guys who have worked for Toyota and for Honda for decades, and they are through and through the biggest VW or Toyota or Honda or whatever manufacturer fans. I think that technicians are the biggest fans of the manufacturers that they work for. But the manufacturers are starting to turn their backs on us. And I think, it's a combination of all that stuff that's driving a lot of us away. Because here's the thing, from all of the stuff that I said in this video, let's somehow translate all of that into a different industry. Would you work that job? I know I wouldn't. Like I said, the only reason I do this is because I actually like it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, and please do consider subscribing. I'm going to try to upload a little bit more, mostly automotive and like tool content and stuff. If you would like to see just snippets out of my day job life, I'm going to leave a link to my Instagram in the description, and you guys can go check that out. Thanks for watching.